What's on your radar, Ryan?
So I am looking at the 17-car pileup that is the New York City Democratic mayoral primary. The latest car to careen out of control is the Dianne Morales for mayor campaign. With Scott Stringer's groping allegation out there, Morales had a shot to consolidate left support. Now, with less than 4 weeks until Election Day, she's facing a staff revolt, with her workers forming a union and demanding contract talks. It led to this appearance on New York One with Errol Morris.
I need to be able to do multiple things at the same time, and that's what's happening here. I'm handling the staff that are, challenged and disgruntled and wanting to organize, and I'm handling the staff that are still here and working hard and committed to the campaign, and I'm being a candidate. New Yorkers understand multitasking. New Yorkers understand, managing crisis and sort of dealing with, different things at the same time. And that's what I'm doing, and that's what I would do as mayor. So I think this is a real reflection of what it would look like to be on the job.
The wildest part of all of this is that you'll get shouted down if you say on social media, as I did, that marching on your own campaign office and beginning to form a union 4 weeks before an election is completely and utterly absurd and does nothing to help workers. It's crazy. And the fact that people refuse to call it crazy is even crazier. Now look, I get that the Morales campaign is not much of a hill to die on. Despite having the backing of the Working Families Party and other lefty groups, it turns out she spent much of her career in the charter school movement, and last February wouldn't even call herself a progressive, saying she might actually have voted for Cuomo.
Were you a supporter of Governor Cuomo or Cynthia Nixon in 2018?
That's a good question. I think I voted for Cuomo.
Okay, sheepishly.
On top of all that, she has clearly badly mishandled the staff situation. She shouldn't be anywhere near the mayor's office. But that doesn't mean that what's going on in her campaign is any less insane. If you need a better example, take Bernie Sanders. The story I'm about to tell you hasn't been reported before. Heading into the 2020 Iowa caucuses, the Sanders campaign hired scores of new canvassers to try to drag out as many voters as they could to the caucuses. In a low turnout affair like that, just a few people can tip a precinct in your direction. Some of the staff started complaining about the hours, some complained about the pay, and some complained about the hierarchical nature of the campaign. They wanted a bottom-up revolution. They didn't want to be told by campaign headquarters how to do their jobs. And most importantly, they wanted days off in January, just weeks before the caucus. And so they started organizing. Not organizing voters to come to the caucus, but organizing among themselves to get time off and to redress those other grievances. Several open letters were written, but not published. Staff proposed a work stoppage and suggested they stop entering data into the campaign system, which would have crippled the operation. This was their moment of, quote, maximum leverage, they argued. Fortunately for the Sanders campaign, they already had a union. It had been formed early in the campaign, so there was a process set up to handle these disputes. A bargaining unit call was scheduled for a week before the caucus to hash out their strategy. The state's regional field directors were also part of the union, and so they knew about the brewing uprising. They got organized too, and came to the call prepared with all of the arguments against a work stoppage and against a public statement denouncing the campaign. A vote was held, and a majority sided with backing down and not making the fight public. A week later, in a scandal-plagued caucus, Sanders won slightly more votes than Buttigieg, but Pete Buttigieg was deemed to have won slightly more delegates. Had a few more people shown up in a few more precincts, even with all the shenanigans, Sanders would have won both the popular vote and the delegate race. A public fight by the Sanders staff a week before the caucus would have sunk his campaign. Sanders later got word of what happened, and he gave this advice to his campaign leadership: stop hiring activists. Hire people who want to do the work. Dianne Morales might not convince you of the insanity of these staff revolts, but maybe that one will. The problem is not the union. The problem is campaign staff who totally misunderstand what Bernie means when he says, not me, us. The us is not you. It is the broader us. It is all of us. The Sanders campaign was about nothing less than improving the lives of all the Sanders campaign was about nothing less than improving the lives of all 9 billion people on the planet. Set against a few days off for a few hundred people or so in Iowa in January, it's not even close which one is more important. That's why millions of people freely donated their time and money to the campaign, because it wasn't about them, it was about everybody. If you're joining a political campaign or a social justice organization for your own self-actualization, as part of your own personal journey, as some brand building exercise, you're doing it wrong. Do something else. Become an artist, a designer, a writer, a woodworker, something else. Hell, if you want it to be all about you, then become the candidate. The problem in progressive movements and campaigns today is groupthink and cowardice. People who know better stay silent because they don't want to be called sellouts or shills. The only reason that Bernie's junior staff didn't blow up his campaign in Iowa is that his slightly less junior staff, the regional field directors, were able to organize and collectively counter the rest of the staff. And guess what? Those field directors did catch hell for what they did, got called management sellouts and shills. But here's the most important thing. They were right. They knew it, and they had the courage to do the right thing. If you find yourself in a similar situation, do the right thing, no matter what the mob calls you afterward. Don't sit silently by and let the loudest voices walk you into destruction. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of this. The good news here is that the left is a victim of its own success. On Twitter, I asked for people's thoughts on this new development in the progressive world and got a ton of different responses. One, from a campaign worker, struck me as particularly thoughtful. He said this: campaign work is hard and demeaning no matter what the candidate. Campaign work is hard and demeaning no matter the candidate. But movement campaigns ensnare workers to a degree that mainstream campaigns do not. They bring you into the industry, but don't offer nearly as many off-ramps into long-term jobs. Most Dems in government and most nonprofits, NGOs, are centrist, moderate, mainstream, whatever you want to call it. Campaign workers for mainstream candidates face a much more favorable pipeline, and I'd assume this disincentivizes them from picking labor battles with their bosses. As a movement campaign worker without those same prospects, you have less to lose and more to gain from making the industry a better place for you and your coworkers going forward. And look, campaign workers need to be treated with dignity, and campaign workers also need to remember that they are doing this ultimately for the benefit of other people. That means fighting for better working conditions without destroying the campaign you're a part of. It doesn't mean just sucking it up and accepting abuse. One way out of this crisis could be a campaign industry-wide guild, like the Screen Actors Guild. Think about it. It would be ridiculous if actors tried to organize each movie set, then shut down when the filming ended, and then organize the next one. That's a recipe for the kind of disasters we're seeing now on the campaign side. The Campaign Workers Guild, which was founded in 2017, is hoping to build that kind of structure in the future, and it can't come too soon. Workers need protection, but so do the people relying on these campaigns to succeed. Another perspective I heard from is the enemies. A Republican operative wrote in to say he couldn't be happier to see all this unfold. He said, left campaign staff see it as an actual job, and because they're LARPing life after the revolution. If leftists are going to continue to run campaigns like this, they will always get annihilated by party machine Dems and Republicans. As the French said about the charge of the Light Brigade, I don't speak French, so I'll do it in English. It's magnificent, but it is not war. It is madness. I hope for continued campaign unions and cluster circular firing squads. It's hilarious and incredibly helpful, he said. He's not trying to be helpful, but he's not wrong. Don't give him what he wants. Emily, I'm curious because a lot of this is sociocultural. And so there may be particular reasons this happening on the progressive left in campaigns, but do you see any of it in right-wing organizations or campaigns?
Yeah, there's been something similar, I think, that has happened on the right for years, and it's that you have some of these more, I would say, like centrist Republicans that try to glom on to populist movements, the Tea Party or what have you, and then sort of come in and LARP in their own way as, you know, real conservatives, Reagan conservatives, and actually all they care about is low taxes, and they actually have contempt for a lot of people that they work with. I think that's sort of just the way our politics is structured, that, you know, DC is the center of our political universe is really a harmful thing. What's so interesting about what you said, and you would know this way better than I would, but my impression is that when some of these activists who join campaigns, you know, they hear Bernie Sanders say it's not about us, it's about them. They think that they really do represent them. They think that them going out there and saying Latinx is really like representing people, and that's what people want, and that's real social justice. And what's so interesting to me is that really these people in so many ways are not socialists. They do not want democratic socialism because it wouldn't be good for them. They're just cultural radicals that don't realize they're part of the neoliberal co-optation of cultural leftism. They think that because they're hitting all of the cultural marks, that sort of means they must be, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because they sort of on the cultural side are aligned with them. And that cultural signaling, I just think, is increasingly useless because somebody like Bernie Sanders has had a very different track record in the past when it comes to immigration and labor and guns. And here we are, and it's just, I have to imagine it's a total mess on your side.
Well, how do the right-wing campaigns handle those folks that come in there LARPing and trying to kind of blow things up?
Not well. I mean, I don't think there's anybody there that really is able to, because again, their bosses are the political establishment. And so I think that's a huge problem. There are just way too few people in Republican politics that actually represent real Republican voters, real right of center voters, real independents who might be voting for Republicans or in between candidates. So there's just a total lack of representation of, I think, real people in Washington. Right. And that's a huge problem on both sides.
And I think one problem we have discussing this is that it's hard for people to hold two things in their heads at the same time. And on the one hand, campaign work is really hard. There are abusive bosses. There's rampant sexual harassment on campaigns. That needs to be rooted out and needs to be fought against. But if you blow up the campaign, it has to have gotten to such a nuclear point that you feel like you had absolutely no other choice than to destroy the campaign that you're a part of. And I mean, union organizing it 4 weeks before the election is itself absurd because you've destroyed the campaign that was providing the jobs that you were trying to unionize. Ironically, if they would have made it through the 4 weeks and won the primary in June, they then get paid all the way through the general election to fight a Republican. So that's like a 2-hour work week in New York City. But you can believe that. But then you can also say that if you're going to blow up the campaign, it has to be extremely serious. And you also have to not be delusional and understand that when you go public like this, you are hurting your campaign. Like there seems to be this idea among some people that the Morales campaign is still credible, that they're going to form this union, they're going to get their union contract, and then voters are going to say, well, that was great. She was held accountable by her campaign workers. She showed that she could overcome this, and now we're going to give her campaign a close look. That's just not right.
Right, and I think without social media, a lot of this would be totally different. I don't mean to oversimplify, but I actually really believe social media is at the heart of so many of these silly conflicts.
Yes.
Well, coming up, Roger Fisk and Philip Wegman are on Team Rising when Rising returns.